Right, couple of kicks there. Wants to kick back, added a bit of advance on the leafer. This is a little Rocket Goldie thing that I'm trying to get right. It's almost ready, but it's got a little bit of smoke because I think that head is compromised. Someone's been in there and gouging it out a bit, and there's a bit of DevCon, and I've got a feeling she's pulling a bit of smoke down the inlet. But anyway, main reason I brought this out here was to show you the oil pressure on an A10. How many of you seen that? Now if you look at the Triumph pressure relief valve, and then underneath that, see that? There's a hose coming out of there up to the gauge. Now this is not a normal deal for a A10 and or the first half dozen years of the A65. It wasn't until they got to very late in the piece that with an A65 like this thing, then they had the casting and that. I'm not sure, I think they had the early pressure relief valve, and then a couple of years later they started using the Triumph dome, which is a much better piece. This thing is it's an A65, it's got a Devi Mead big block, and internally it's actually a little bit of a silly name, but it's a Thunderbolt on the cases, on the Lightning top end, 34mm McKinney's. The Right, so here we've got A10 crank in there, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the Carrillo conrods, A10 crank, and that strokes it from, and a little bit of a hot rod cam as well, that strokes an A65 from 74 up to 84mm, so 10mm stroke. We'll go over here, I'll show you that in a minute. So when it comes to putting oil pressure indication on an A10 and early A65, see the little hole there? You can see, hang on, I'll get some glasses on, I can't see. Now you might be able to see, right, so I've drawn a line and dotted a little hole there, just marked a little hole, right, or where I would drill. And then like on that other bike I just showed you, I would drill and tap something like that tube in there, which is actually a balance tube pipe off a T140. And then I would use the Triumph, I'd go down here and I'd use the Triumph pressure relief valve. This is the standard one, it just has a little ball on a spring, which is next to useless. The Triumph uses a piston, it uses springs, which you can change your springs quite a bit, and the cap on top, and all the threads and everything's the same, so it's easy to use and easy to do. The bike I just fired up has that oil pressure relief valve, and it's going to get one of these to stop the drain, like it's an anti-drain valve, vacuum operated, about 6 or 7 pound off pulls the ball off the seat, and in goes your oil. But I don't like doing that sort of thing, or like what this one's getting, which is a ball valve down in behind there. The other oil tank's got oil in it, it's got a little custom oil tank I had to make up in there. Anyway, I'll show you this bike another day, but when I get it sorted out, a little bit more to do. Ball valves are great, but this thing was also going to get an oil gauge up the top. And oil gauges are necessary, as far as I'm concerned, when you're going to use one of these or a ball valve. Anyway, moving right along, this is another A10 project. A bit of a silly one really, I guess. It's a bored and sleeved and bored again. Hang on, I'll get my other arm. Shit. Sorry about that. Bored and sleeved and bored again. You can see they're sleeved. This has had to be cut away here to get the thing to go to the bottom. Right now I've only got an oddball T140 that's taken out, but in here is a Norton crank. The rod doesn't matter so much. It's going to use the T1, the B44 pistons, which is what that one is, and that one is. They're B44 on the Devi Mead Big Block. Again, that's another Devi Mead Big Block, B44, either 79 or 80 mil. Puts a beezer right up, that one there anyway, it'll be right up around 9. This one's 833. This again will be the same as that. This will be a 900. But trying to make an A65 barrel go on an A10, modify the cams, I'm going to have to deck this almost right down to the bottom there to get some deck height, and to get the cams and the followers to work on the different height of the cam. I've modified an A65 cam, and well, I didn't, I got a friend of mine who's a better machinist than me to do it. There's still a lot of work, and I'm still trying to figure out what rods are going to work best. The T140 rod there has been just an experimental rod, and it's just been bored out. Another thing I do with beezers, especially in particular the A65, although I do it with these things. This is a needle roller, and there's your typical breather point for an A10, and your typical breather point for an A65. Okay. So what I do there is I put a fitting on it like that, or like that, and I take that hose up to the back of the oil tank somewhere high in the oil tank, and that stops any mess when these things wet something, which is not unusual for a beezer, then a beezer twin that is, or the singles for that matter, because they're gear pumps. Anyway, so this line, 3/8 line, will then go up to the back of the oil tank on a right angle fitting similar to that. I'll just put a right angle version of that in the tank. This here is going to a, you can see where this has had a little bit of carnage going on. Alloy rods, alloy caps, you know how it goes. Well, if you don't, you should. If you're into beezers, you should be aware of it. Anyway, so this will end up with a ball bearing, or it could be a roller. It depends. It's the A10. You can see it's been, well, it's been modified, and it has now a quill, and it's been drilled all the way into the drillings. Normally there would be holes here and here for the oil out of the what would normally be the bush, similar to this, and that's similar. What would happen, this would be your bush, it would oil through that and then up through into here, up through and cross to both your journals. That's a pretty typical standard one. But this is a little Spitty motor, as in the Spitfire, but it's just going to, the frame that I've got for it is pretty ordinary, so a lot of lugs cut off, so it's just going to be a little dirt bike. But I'd already started this roller bearing conversion some time ago. I don't use a needle roller on this side, I machine the case, put a steel top hat bush. It gets held back to the case by 3 screws. A little bit of work in here yet, and then when you're finished in there, you got to come over here and you come out, and that drilling there has to be centered and the block welded into the back of the outer timing cover, and then drill more drilling and quills through, dowels through here to come out into the case and feed it, and that, like a hidden feed. That'll get the same thing, of course, because that's the Norton crank in there, and you can see where it's all been quilled out, and the long nose, and it's got a similar ball bearing going on as what I've just showed you that's in that one. It's not a needle roller, it's a steel bush. You can see where this has got the alloy welding going on, and that allows me then, I had to do that to fill in the drilling in the back with the machining, and then I can pick up some drillings off that. And now when it comes to an A65, if you've ever got your cases apart, you should do something like this. This will get JB Weld or a bit of Devcon or whatever sort of glue, decent material, and then clear that. That's your alternator wire lead out. That'll still clear. May need to bang it in a little bit more just to get this sprocket. I've got to put the other half of the case on just to make sure, and that I can get a clearance on my 21 tooth, which I'm likely to use, or this particular motor here will just be 20. And that crank has been lightened. This is typical A65 crank. They have a nice swage down across the top instead of a full width hub, a full width flywheel like the A10s do. And the mess that this one ended up being here, drilled out like Swiss cheese. If I'd have realised that there was going to be a problem with them Carrillos as much as it was for weight, to counteract the extra weight of the steel rods that's been drilled to crazy, then I would have asked and taken the crank back and done something like this to the crank first to mimic this on an A10 crank. Anyway, this will get MAP rods, standard 650, but with the big bore, and it's going in a crazy little special. This here is going in a 71-72, and again the Devi Mead with the big pistons. They're 80mm I think in this case. And you can see, well, you might be able to make out, you can see the bolted up Norton crank, the Carrillo rods, and again it's a roller or ball in there with the crank modified for a quill, as I did, we showed you with the other Norton crank. And I just like to use the ball. You can see, you might be able to see that bit of steel overlap on the housing in there, and then I put a groove around the inner housing. Gets a groove machined in there for the oil to go around the bearing case, or the bearing sleeve. Again, it's just a typical roller bearing in that side. This one's getting, this has been taken out. It allows me to put 21 or even 22 in it. This engine will carry probably a 22 on a 47 rear. That's pretty crazy. And the Carrillo rods. Or what helped in the early stages when I started doing this, MAP hadn't started making these H-beam rods in chrome moly, so these ones have had to be drilled pretty well. As you can see, that one there's had a few drillings going on. It is a standard cast iron centre. It's not going near a racetrack, and it just needs to be tall geared to get along pretty well, you know. Cam is a bit of a silly thing. It's been made up by a friend of mine years ago. It needs to come apart, this whole engine, and sort it out a little bit more before. There's a few things to do. The barrels aren't quite going on. It's just a bit of a dry build at the moment. Anyway, so that's a good thing. That's a good thing if you're going to play with beezers. And you can do this similar. This is on this thing here, similar to, like I said, the earlier A65s where they don't have that factory. It wasn't until 69, I think, maybe 68, where the factory decided they should put a gauge on there, or a light, some sort of indication anyway. And that's what they did. Should have done it when they first cast these cases, don't you think? Would have been a bit smarter. But anyway, and they should have put a bloody roller bearing in it to start with as well, instead of going back from a bush to a bush and carrying on with the bush. I mean, I don't know. I like to have been around at the time, I guess. So that's beezers, and that's me trying to make them a little bit stronger and more reliable and a little bit faster, and for whatever reason it's just a bit of fun. Alright, so doing a little army bike on a 73 that never existed. I'm just building this up for sale. You know, I read the other day where Nigeria had T140 models early on like this, 73, that they actually had for the army. So, you know, painted up like an army bike. I've got 73 Triumph 750. Well, that could be 73rd Transport or whatever. Make up your mind what you want to call it. That's another little thing I'm going to do up on YouTube fairly soon. It's just a stupid thing. Anyway, that's BSAs. And once I sort out a bit of smoking with this head, which I think I've figured out it to be, then I've ridden it around the block a few times and it seems to go nice. It's smooth. There's bugger all vibes. It's a good little bike. Alright, thank you very much for watching.